knew that Germany was really having success, and there was lots of German people in the area. And we were watching them pretty closely. And my sister come up and says, Canada has declared war on Germany. And I probably said, oh, so they did or something. I don't know. I don't think I got too excited. My brother Bill, he joined up right away. He joined up there in '39, was over in England before Christmas. And he would write back and tell us that's when the Germans got the bombing, and he would write back and tell us some pretty horrible stories that was going on over there. I wanted to join the Air Force. I wanted to be a tail gunner. And that's what I went up first to join and be a tail gunner. Well, I sat for about 6 weeks waiting for them. They said there was nothing doing, they weren't recruiting. And there was nothing doing, and I waited for probably 6 weeks. And nothing happened, and then I even tried the Navy because Bill, my brother, wrote back and said in the Army they were laying out in this mud and all. He was with the 49ers, Edmonton, and the problems they were having, I thought, I don't want no part of that. So I tried the Navy, and I got the same response from them early in December. There was and they weren't recruiting in the Army either. Things were just sitting there. And finally, it come out in the paper that I think they wanted 50 or something like that to reinforce light artillery. So I thought, well, I'm not getting nowhere. So I went up there and had no problems. That was the 14th of December, 1940. As soon as they got all the recruiting done, they moved it down to Camp Borden. But it was so close to Christmas time, we got a uniform and learned how to halt instead of whoa and that kind of stuff, and left turns and what. So certainly early in January, then they started with the 1st Armored Tank Brigade, and so I transferred over into them. And that's which was the best move, the best thing that ever happened, because it was the best outfit, I think, during the war that you didn't have to wait, and we had trucks to ride in. We didn't have to wade through the mud. Well, we went right into the truck I don't know how to explain the truck. They were a 3-ton, single wheel. The wheels were quite large. They were the big traction wheels. They were 4-wheel drives. And we went right to them, and Chev and Ford was for the Canadians. I remember getting on ship. It was a big French liner, and it hadn't been converted over to troop at this time. So they had the crew on there, which was one of the nicest trips that we ever made because we didn't have to peel no spuds or wash dishes. They had their crew to do it for us, and even clean our own staterooms. But while we sat, the only thing I can remember, while we sat in harbor, the bar was closed. You couldn't get no liquor, no beer. When the convoy was formed and we left Halifax, well, it was quite foggy. And they brought in 2 big battleships along with the other escort vessels we had. And in this fog, and they're tooting and hooting, and it was exciting. For a guy off the prairie that never heard this stuff before, it was something. I was just filling my shoes just the way I figured the Army would, and I was really enjoying this. When we left Halifax, we went way north to miss the submarines as much as we could. And they had just sunk, and I think it was one of the German battleships up there. And the debris, the ocean was just full of debris, all kinds of floating junk and oil and whatnot. It was quite a mess. And into the snow and ice, I know it got pretty cold and chilly there for a while, but it seemed to me that we did get one good scare, that we were down below when they dropped some depth charges. And it's just like being in a tin can and somebody beating on the outside when they let loose. Well, this was the first time this ever happened to us. And I tell you, boy, you had your life jacket and was up on deck there in a quick hurry to find out that, it was, I guess they did pick up a sub somewhere along the line or something, but I don't ever remember any sub being sunk at that time. We landed at Greenock, I think is the name of the place. Yeah, the barge, they anchored out in the middle of I guess it's the Clyde River there, whatever. And we got off by barge. And of course, they got to make a big how do you do about this. So we all had it. They brought out the tape recorders, and we all would get up and sing, "Roll Out the Barrel," and another safe troop ship had landed here over here in Britain, and oh, it was a big deal. And they brought us down to Salisbury Plains, was the first landing, which is, it's a big area, and it's pretty well all, it's, what I remember of it is pretty flat, and it's got a good rock base, good place for tank training, truck training, and that's where we landed, and we stayed there till weather started to change in the fall. And then they started moving us south. They moved us into a permanent, a big mansion. There was in the neighborhood, about 365 in the company, and there was room in this mansion for the whole works of us. They moved us from there, they moved us right down on the waterfront, just right alongside Brighton, in a place called Hove. We sat right out there looking right across the English Channel. And I think there was an English tank regiment, I think, was in there. They had GO on their shoulders. One day they would come along, and we loaded, I don't remember rations, but we loaded ammunition. We loaded up with ammunition and fuel, which was, most of them tanks at that time were gas burners. And we loaded up, and we were told that we could take our boots off that night, but to keep our clothes on. And they gave us no explanation. I guess probably they didn't know. And so this we done, and it was the following day that we were given orders to unload again, step down, and then we picked up our rations and took them back out to the kitchens and stuff of the units that was there. As I say, when I supplied the Calgary tanks, that's where I got my information, and the cooks are all sniffling, and nobody around. Normally there's all kinds of people in tanks and everything else, and there's nothing there. And they said, yeah, the dep was on, and they got blowed out of the water, and we figured we were trained enough. Little did we know that that was the best place to be. When you got into action, then you wished that you were back sitting in Burgess Hill playing cricket with the girls. I can remember being on guard on the door one day, and it's quite foggy, and I could hear this plane coming. And I knew it wasn't one of ours because the German planes, the twin motors weren't, what do you call it, synchronized? Each one, and I knew this was, and I could hear it coming in the fog, and finally it come out of the fog, and it was low, and it come right over top of the barracks, and I had more, so I thought, well, here's where I can, so I was up there just banging away with my old rifle, but it flew inland, not very far, 3 or 4 miles, and it got knocked down, and that was the first German plane and Germans that I'd seen up close. 2 of them I still remember 2 of them had jumped, and the parachute was, they were too low for the parachutes to open, and they were practically up to their knees. It was a plowed field they landed in, and they drove them they were just mangled. And then there was 3 dead, I remember, in the plane, and of course we all grabbed a little piece of tin and just for souvenirs, which I have no idea whatever took place. So they soon forgot about that when we seen lots of them afterwards. At that time, I don't think we knew where we were going. We knew we were going to go somewhere because we were issued light cotton clothing. So we knew we were going someplace that was warm, and we had to waterproof our trucks. So we had to get under there and run a breathing column from the carburetor up and shove putty and stuff into holes and whatnot and get all ready. And we were close enough to the ocean at this point. When the tide would come in, there was a backwash there that come up, and it was probably 5 feet of water would come up. And that was kind of interesting, because once we got them waterproofed, then we had to run them through this every time to get a little training. And when you hit this cold water, and And at the odd time, a guy would get a little excited and take his foot off because you had to keep the motor roaring, because the backwash of the water would kill your motor, and then you had to dive down and hook a rope on it to get pulled out of there. That was kind of fun to watch somebody do this. We'd all stand there and cheer and clap and think it was smart, but as long as it didn't happen to you. I remember leaving Scotland. We left Scotland. We were on the Empress of, it was the Empress of Scotland, just a little passenger ship, and there was, we didn't go with our boats for this here waterproof, and it was a waste of time, because there was some were chosen to go with them, and they landed with the landing crew and Sicily, but we didn't. But so we were on a troop ship, and we went right out into rough water right out of Scotland, and I can remember sick boys. Oh man, that was an event on it. That was, as I say, that was my most exciting night of my life, and it still has been. But we left the convoy. For what reason, I don't know. The convoy there was a huge convoy too. We had some old tugs that were pretty slow. But there was a submarine that was shot out of the water there in the Mediterranean. It'd come out right out in plain view. It just, you see the pictures of submarines standing on end. Well, we did get a view of the one that this did happen. So that was but I was picked out to fire guard down in the hold while the boys unloaded. And what I remember, it was quite quiet. It wasn't, but they were going and going, and it took, I would say, in the neighborhood of a couple of hours or maybe more before they gave us the order to roll up our hoses. And well, we went up on top. Well, holy Toledo. I don't know, there must have been even now I get emotional when I get thinking of it. There was probably, I would say in the neighborhood of 1,000 ships anyhow in the harbor, maybe more. And all of them are equipped with 4 to 10, maybe more anti-aircraft guns. And they fire, I call them, most of them call them pom-poms. As one fires, they just rotate, and they fire a pretty good sized shell. And about every 7th one comes out red. It's a tracer. Well, that sky was just absolutely just tracers going, and actually every ship has a I call them balloons. I don't know really, on the end of about, I don't know, a couple 1,000-foot cable hanging way up above, and every once in a while they'd hit one of them, and the fire would blaze. And we would scream, "Got another one!" The moon was shining, and it was just pretty as bright as day, and the temperature is about 100 above. I never noticed that part though at this time, and they would dump that, and then they'd fire these rockets in, and we were loaded with rockets, and these little rockets would take off. They'd fire about 10 in a cluster. Then they'd hit these here pockets of what it was they were dumping out. But it come down, it really brightened up the sky, and when it landed, it would just set fire to everything. And these rockets would hit that and just blow into pieces. Just come down in little sparks, but you had to climb down off the side of the boat in the big rope meshing down, and they took us out. We were sitting out in the middle of the harbor, and we had to get on a barge and go to shore. The Germans were overhead, quite bombing, and I think they were really targeting that troop ship. And the British didn't want to, when I got on board, I don't know how many barges that went ahead of me, but we were the last ones out. But when I got on board, the British wouldn't turn us loose. They figured that we'd get out in the harbor and get hit by a bomb. We'd have no protection. We got quite wet. They did drop bombs that was landed fairly close, so we did get quite wet. Brand new, it's so much excitement, you're too dumb to get scared. When we did hit shore, it was kind of a funny little stretch through there again. We finally got our company together, and we landed in British territory. The Canadians were off in the central part of Sicily. We weren't too far from the invasion point, but we landed in the British section. So we finally formed up and started down the road, and the British was in control, and the Germans are still over top, dropping bombs, and they screeched. They just whistled, this was all new, and And whenever it sounded like they were too close, you'd hear the British would beller, hit the road. And of course, you'd fall down there in your belly with your 100-pound pack. I was carrying my pack by this time. And then up you'd get in. The little cook, we had a little cook, Willie Keep was his name. He was about 5 foot nothing. And he had 4 or 5 special butcher knives that he had to bring with him. And he didn't have room in his pack, and he didn't have enough body to carry this. So there was a big fellow that was in front of him, he worked in the office, and he was a pretty soft sort of guy. And he's coming down, and he's scared. And these butcher knives are clingety-clang coming down the road. And I was trying to soothe him. I was yelling back there, you keep them butcher knives. The Germans probably can hear you, and that's why they're dropping bombs. But eventually we ended up in a big courtyard. By this time the moon had gone down, and it was blacker than cold. But the smell was just wicked. But anyhow, after all this, you were ready to lay down. And when daylight came, we were laying right very close to 2 dead Italians who had been killed and been laying there for days because they were pretty well mulched up by this time. It didn't take us long to find shovels and bury them a little deeper in a hurry. So that was our first morning in Sicily, was kind of give you an idea that this isn't play anymore. These guys are out here for kill you if they get the chance to do that. We moved up alongside Mount Etna. The Germans really hung us up there. We got into the rocks and the cliffs and whatnot, and they really hung us up for quite a while there. Well, we've seen lots, what I can remember, we've seen lots of Italians. The Italians, they weren't there to fight. They didn't cause. All I can really remember them was just the infantry was ahead of us, and the tanks. And all I can really remember is just strings and strings of Italians just gumbooted back, heading back just to get out of it. I don't remember any trouble with them at all. We were supply outfit. On the normal conditions, we hauled supplies up to like their main headquarters. And they had trucks that pick it up from there and supplied the tanks and whatnot. But when the fighting got heavy and they couldn't keep up, and then we used to go right in. Well, it got pretty exciting at that time because one thing the Germans didn't like was supplies coming in, and they always seemed to have a spotter that was out there. When they seen you coming in, we got shelled. You could pretty near guarantee that. Towards the last, I know at the beginning we used to. It seems like that's where we learned our lesson. Mount Etna, we went in with quite large, dozen trucks at a time or maybe more. And we got the shell to pieces. And we learned to run in maybe 2 trucks at a time and then 2 more later on and 2. Germans were funny. Germans everything was a pattern to them. I've heard the infantry say that different times, this would be at nighttime, they'd be lined up on a road and they wanted to cross a road. And the Germans would have a machine gun firing right down that road. Well, they'd fire a burst of, 30 seconds, and then they would pause for a second or two, and then they'd fire. And they said, when that pause was made, they'd run a couple across, and then they'd wait for them. And the artillery was the same. Seemed like they would fire a shell over, and it was always short, the first one, I guess getting range or whatever. And then you had 2-3 minutes to kind of figure out what was the best thing to do, and then the barrage would start creeping up on you. Sometimes when the shell was close enough, the best thing to do was just make a mad dash to get in close, and then they'd fire over top. Ortona was a tough deal. We moved up, and I should mention this, and this is the first break that our service company got. I mean, the tanks got different breaks and whatnot, but to keep supplies up, we were on the road every day from the day we landed until we moved up as far to a little place called Guglielmesi. That's the only town in Italy that I can remember. And they stopped, we broke off there we could have been there a couple of weeks if it was that long, to re-equip and get all, because that's when we were going to move up. to the Morrow River and Ortona. We're going to take over from the British. The tank brigades were all out, sitting out all around us. But when we got the order to move, I run into malaria, which this is on in November, which is strange because, I mean, malaria season is open over a year or months before that. But anyhow, I did. I ended up, and so I just really got back to the company at the time. They got to the Morrow River, which it was a tough little deal. The Morrow River, they couldn't get the tanks across the mud and whatnot in the artillery, and it was raining in mud, and tried to keep supplies into, especially ammunition at that time. And then I knew I wasn't feeling well, and I knew I was having problems, and I was coming down with jaundice at that time. But I stayed with them till we did get across the Morrow River. It probably was about the 15th of December, or 16th or 17th. I don't know what happened, but I got blowed up. Next thing I know, I was in the hospital in Barrie. We went in there and supplied the tanks, and we ended up with extra supplies. And I was going to take care of the supplies that night. The next day, it seemed to me that I was going on sick parade. I was going to get out of there. And I never got to that. So whether we were shelled or whether they blew the ammunition up or what took place, all I know that I got tore muscles and shook up. We were in the British hospital in Barrie till after Christmas. I don't know when, on into January. And they'd set up a Canadian hospital just north of Naples, which I think was the 14th General. I'm not positive on it, but I think, and they flew us. Took 2 days. We tried to fly through one day, and the weather was so bad we had to go back and sit down again. But the second day we'd ended up, and then so quite a length of time I was there. Then I went down to Salerno. They had a big convalescent in Salerno. I never got back to the unit from then till pretty the end of May. I was out for about 4 months. They were just north of Casino. So they had moved, they were having so much trouble with the Casino, the Americans and the British and everybody that was in there was having that big of a problem, that they had moved the tank brigade and the first, all the Canadians back. It seemed like any time they got a tough deal, the Canadians were involved. And they moved them back, and they were north of Casino. I can remember driving through Casino, and there was nothing. It was just, the big monastery was all destroyed at this time, and it was up around in the Lear Valley, and they were right in there when I joined the company again. Back in England, the outfits are all broke up in 6 sections 6 trucks to a section is how we operated. You want one section, a truck or two, and the section I was in, I think it was probably the best guys in the world. And for some reason or other, we was called the Dirty Six. Anytime that something nasty needed to be done, it seemed like we used to call on the Dirty Six, which I had a little army buddy just passed away here about a month ago. Probably the last 10 summers, he used to come to Morinville, the relatives and whatnot. He'd stop by for a couple of days, and he'd always remember this, try to figure out, he was one of the Dirty Six. And so we used to have quite a laugh over that deal. So I'm the last of the Dirty Six. As I said, I kept telling him he's got to hang in there because I'm the last of the Barager family, and I don't want to be the last of the Dirty Six too, but I guess I got to hold both positions. I think it's part of the training, you get all kinds of training just to survive. You do the best you can.